And yet the cage, in the end, could not hold him. On the 1st of March 1815, Napoleon Bonaparte stepped ashore on the southern coast of France with roughly 1,000 men at his back, and the audacity of a man who had never truly believed the world could do without him. He had spent 10 months on the island of Elba, a small, sun-warmed rock in the Tyrrhenian Sea that his captors had offered him as a kind of cruel joke, a miniature empire for a man who had once commanded half the known world. He had watched over it with restless energy, reformed its roads, inspected its mines, drilled its tiny garrison, but all the while his eyes were elsewhere. They were always elsewhere. The march north was unlike anything in the long theatre of his career. No battles, not yet. Instead, something stranger and more powerful. Royalist troops sent to stop him melted away or crossed over to his side, regiment by regiment, their rifles lowering as he walked toward them alone, his grey coat open, his chest offered to whatever they might choose to do. He knew they would not fire. He had always known how to read a crowd, how to read a soldier. By the time he reached Paris on the 20th of March, King Louis XVIII had already fled into the night, and the city received its emperor with a noise that shook the windows of the Tuileries. The Allied powers in Vienna heard the news and went very quiet for a moment. Then they declared him an outlaw, an enemy of the peace of Europe, and began to mobilize. They had been through this before. They would end it properly this time. What followed was a campaign of extraordinary compression and ferocity. Napoleon had perhaps 90 days, perhaps a little more, before the full weight of European coalition armies converged on France. His only hope was to strike first, to drive between the British forces under Wellington and the Prussian forces under Blücher before they could unite, to shatter them separately and force a negotiated peace. It was a gambler's strategy, but it was not an unreasonable one. He had done it before. He had done it many times before. In the middle of June 1815, he crossed into Belgium. For 2 days it seemed as though the old magic might hold. He struck the Prussians hard at Ligny and sent them reeling northward. He had Wellington's army within reach. One more blow, clean and decisive, and the coalition might fracture. It had happened before. It could happen again. It did not happen again. The battle that ended his story was fought on the 18th of June, 1815, near a small Belgian village called Waterloo. The ground was soft from heavy rain. His artillery could not maneuver as it should. His commanders misread orders or delayed too long. Wellington held the ridge with the particular grim stubbornness that was his genius, and when the Prussians arrived in the late afternoon, battered from Ligny but unbroken, driven forward by Blücher's iron will, the French line collapsed. Not bent. Collapsed. The Imperial Guard, the Old Guard, those men who had followed him from Egypt to Moscow and back again, were broken and fell back. And when that happened, the army understood that something final had occurred. The retreat became a rout, and the rout became a catastrophe, and Napoleon rode away from the field in the dark. He abdicated again 4 days later. He tried, briefly, to reach America. The British intercepted him, and this time there would be no Elba, no little island with roads to improve and a garrison to drill. This time they sent him to Saint Helena, a volcanic speck in the South Atlantic, 2,000 miles from the nearest continent, surrounded at all times by British warships. He would not be walking back from this one. He lived there for 6 years. He dictated his memoirs. He argued with his British jailer. He shaped with extraordinary deliberate care the story he wanted the world to tell about him. He cast himself as the child of the revolution, the defender of liberty against the old tyrannies of Europe, the man who had been stabbed in the back by treacherous marshals and impossible weather and the jealous coalitions of lesser men. He was not entirely wrong about any of it. He was not entirely right either. He was, to the last, a man who understood that history is a narrative and that narratives can be authored. He died on the 5th of May, 1821. He was 51 years old. The cause was most likely stomach cancer, though arguments about that have never entirely stopped. His last reported words included, somewhere in the feverish mumbling, the name of France and the name of his son, and the word army. Whether that is true or whether it is the kind of beautiful detail that accretes around great men like barnacles on a hull, it is the kind of truth that fits, and perhaps that is enough. What he left behind is not easily measured. The Napoleonic Code remains the foundation of legal systems across France, across Europe, across Latin America, across Louisiana. The principle that law should be written clearly, applied equally, and not depend on the whim of a king or the memory of a judge, that principle survived every defeat he suffered on the battlefield. His reorganization of the French state, its schools and courts and ministries, persists in recognizable form to this day. His military innovations, the corps system, the emphasis on speed and concentration, the understanding that morale is a weapon as real as any cannon, were studied by every serious soldier who came after him, from Grant to Rommel to Eisenhower. And then there is the myth, which is something different from the legacy, and in some ways larger than it. Within 20 years of his death, his body was returned to Paris and placed in a tomb beneath the dome of Les Invalides, where it still rests, in a sarcophagus of dark red porphyry, so massive it seems less like a coffin than a monument to the idea of him. People still come. They stand in the circular gallery above and look down at that great dark form below, and something happens in the chest that is not easy to name. He was a man of staggering contradictions. He liberated and he enslaved. He spread the ideas of the revolution, and he made himself an emperor. He spoke of peace and spent 20 years at war. He was brilliant, and he was vain, and he was capable of extraordinary cruelty and extraordinary generosity, sometimes within the same hour. He was, in other words, deeply human, only more so, only at a scale that the world had rarely seen and has not quite seen since. The boy from Corsica who looked at the map of Europe and decided it was not enough. The general who told his troops the centuries were watching them. The exile who died on a rock in the middle of the ocean, still dictating, still arguing, still convinced that the story was not over. In a way, he was right. The story is never quite over. That is the last and strangest thing about him. The eagle rose and fell, and the shadow it cast is longer than the flight.